All right, here we are, live on the Thomas Take Sports Podcast YouTube channel, bringing some reinforcements. The whiteboard never gets old. A lot can be done with this whiteboard for the small price of $650, I believe it was. So, what a worthy investment this will be for the show. The only problem is I have to hold it, which sucks, but safe to say, the subject matter is written on the board. UFC welterweight question marks take two. First video did not upload too well, so I'm re-uploading this again. I'll delete the other one. UFC welterweight questions. The biggest question right now post UFC 251 is who is next for Kamaru Usman. The welterweight champ just defended his title for the second time, coming off a big win over Jorge Masvidal. The champ took the fight on 6 days' notice too. A lot of people aren't talking about that. Jorge Masvidal, yeah, he took that fight on 6 days' notice, but Kamaru Usman took that fight on 6 days' notice too. A lot of pressure, a ton of pressure on the champion, and a ton of mental strain that it probably put on the champion as well to have to mentally change the mindset from fighting Jorge Masvidal or from fighting Gilbert Burns to Jorge Masvidal. Much different fighters in Burns and Masvidal. Burns a little bit more well-rounded. Masvidal and Usman have obviously had some heat with one another, some beef, some bad blood, so that changes the dynamics, whereas Usman and Gilbert Burns have been friends for a long time. So mentally, for Kamaru Usman to change the channel, that was pretty big. That showed the true heart of a champ. So the question is, who is next for the champion? Who is next for Kamaru Usman? You have Colby Covington right up top here. And I didn't rank these in any particular order. These were just the options that popped into my head. Colby Covington up top here. Gilbert Burns second here. Jorge Masvidal 2, obviously the rematch. And George St Pierre number 4, as well as Leon Edwards at 5. Now, these aren't rankings. This is not a rankings list. This is simply diving into the 5 options that I think are likely for Kamaru Usman. So let's start off with Colby Covington. The first fight with Usman and Covington was a fight that many people were excited for, myself included. The bad blood between those two lingered for a couple years. And I think the fight itself actually delivered. It's really rare to have a back-and-forth battle, a bad blood battle, if you will, with two fighters within a fight, and to actually have that bad blood actually produce a great fight. And Covington and Usman did that. Now, moving forward, Usman wins that fight in the 5th and final round, TKO. It was a slobber knocker. They went back and forth. Colby had his moments in the fight. Usman had his moments in the fight, obviously enough moments to actually win the fight. Whereas Colby Covington has not fought since. And I really wonder, if he doesn't fight Kamaru Usman, who could he fight? I'll get to that a little bit later. But is Colby the number 1 contender right now, coming off a loss to the champ? No. But would Colby generate pay-per-view buys for the champion Kamaru Usman? 100%. Definitely would. But we'll see on that. We'll figure that out. I think Usman versus Colby 2 will happen. I just don't know if it's in the stratosphere right now in terms of what is next for Kamaru Usman. Now, Gilbert Burns, the next option, he was originally the number 1 contender, given the title shot due to the fact that the UFC and Jorge Masvidal could not come to an agreement. He tests positive for COVID, which then puts Jorge Masvidal in the driver's seat of the UFC 251 welterweight title fight, earning himself that shot due to the fact that Gilbert Burns tested positive for COVID. But to me, while Colby generates the most heat in a matchup, Gilbert Burns is probably the best stylistic matchup as far as a challenger that could possibly beat Kamaru Usman. He's very well-rounded. He's on a tear right now, coming off of the best fight of his career against Tyron Woodley. Both Burns and Usman fought Woodley very much the same. And if Burns could beat Woodley the way that Usman could, I would love to see these two guys share the octagon and see which one can cancel the other out. Or if this ends up being a stand-up battle, much like Usman and Covington was. Kamaru Usman's a great wrestler, right? Colby Covington is another great wrestler. But when you have two great wrestlers, they cancel themselves out, and you start to see a strategic battle inside this octagon. And Burns is that guy. Burns is the guy that could do that in a fight with Kamaru Usman. I'd like to see how that plays out. Personally, being that was the fight that was offered to us, that's the fight that I'd like to see post Masvidal. But segue here, Jorge Masvidal, the rematch. The rematch is plausible due to the fact that Masvidal, in his own right, helped generate 1.3 million pay-per-view buys for UFC 151. It was massive event. Fight Island was extremely successful. It was an event that I think, in retrospect, was one of the best events that have been put on in recent UFC history. The card was stacked top to bottom, but the juice that event got was from one Jorge Masvidal. As excited as I was for Usman and Burns, Masvidal was the guy that made the event piping hot. Whether or not Masvidal would come in and win this fight on 6 days' notice, that was the biggest question heading into UFC 151. He didn't make it happen, but I thought he did win the first round. And you have to wonder, how would that fight look if Jorge Masvidal had a full training camp and if Jorge Masvidal didn't have to cut 20 pounds, 22 pounds in 6 days? So for business, right here, business-wise, Jorge Masvidal 2 is a matchup that makes the most sense for business purposes. But I don't like the idea of immediate rematches, especially when the first fight was extremely one-sided. And that fight was extremely one-sided. Was it the most entertaining fight? No. But did Kamaru Usman do what he had to do in order to take out a very worthy and capable challenger that could have taken his belt on 6 days' notice? He did that and then some, which is why he won that fight. So no problem with that, in my opinion. But business-wise is really the only reason why we should see Masvidal Usman 2 right away. Outside of that, competitively, I feel like Masvidal should take on another opponent. And Masvidal should take on Colby Covington. That's the link between 1 and 3. Both guys right here, top and number 3, both guys lost to Kamaru Usman. They're both coming off of losses to Kamaru Usman. In order to get back into that title shot against Kamaru Usman, they got to fight each other. There's a lot of heat there between Covington and Masvidal. There's a lot of hype that would be generated by Colby Covington and Masvidal, and it's a fight that should happen. So that kind of solves that problem. Meanwhile, Covington and Masvidal can fight. Meanwhile, Usman can fight Gilbert Burns, or Usman could fight another surging welterweight in Leon Edwards, who is on a tear. The last guy that Leon Edwards lost to, I should say, was Kamaru Usman. So there's history there. So with any of these opponents, and we'll get to the fourth one in a minute, George St Pierre, but with any of these opponents, there is history there that would help the fight generate pay-per-view buys. George St Pierre, the greatest fighter in UFC history, in my humble opinion. Do I think he is retired? No, I don't. There's a difference between me thinking that he's retired and whether he'll come back to fight Kamaru Usman. I think the one fight that could bring George St Pierre out of retirement is a fight that he has made no bones about it, a fight that he really wants, and that's a fight between George St Pierre and Khabib Nurmagomedov. George would be the first fighter, if he accomplished it, to win 3 titles in 3 different weight classes. George would move down to 155 pounds and take on Khabib, the undefeated Dagestan fighter. for the UFC lightweight title. I don't think that's going to happen because we have a lot of storylines built into this UFC lightweight division, but it could. George St. Pierre is one of the biggest stars in MMA history, and as I said, arguably the GOAT. So really, he could get whatever he wants at this point. So that's why I wrote down George St. Pierre in this video. Colby, Gilbert Burns, Masvidal 2, George St. Pierre as this somewhat wild card matchup, and then Leon Edwards. Burns and Edwards are the two hottest welterweights in the division right now, outside of Usman, obviously. But if Usman does not fight Masvidal, I think Masvidal should fight Colby. If Usman fights Gilbert Burns, I think Leon Edwards should take on maybe Stephen Wonderboy Thompson or someone in that rank inside the UFC welterweight division. Thanks so much for tuning in, everybody. I think that should be what is next for Kamaru Usman, dissecting it. A lot of questions, but they will soon be answered.